I want to talk about their process because they've changed a bunch of things kind of last minute. Can you kind of talk us through what Democratic process that they're going to go through that's different than the Republicans?
Well, keep in mind that for the Democrats, that they have an incumbent this particular cycle. And so we normally wouldn't see much action for them, even if they were using the traditional caucus procedures. But what they decided to do, because the Democratic National Committee decided they didn't want Iowa to be one of the early states, and the Iowa Democrats were trying to find ways around that, were unsuccessful, and decided to basically try to go along with as much as what the DNC wanted as possible. And for one of the things that that meant was that they were no longer going to hold a traditional in-person caucus. Now, by state law, they do have to caucus, but only for the party business. So it means electing delegates to the county convention, members of the county central committee, but that's just the party business. In terms of the presidential preference poll of some sort, the Democrats are going to use a mail-in ballot. And that procedure's already started. People can request the ballots now, and they'll be mailed out later. And then eventually they'll be tallied up, and the results will be announced. I believe it's Super Tuesday, probably late that evening, something along those lines. So basically, as far as Democrats are concerned, Iowa is no longer part of the early voting states and will basically be lost in the mix of the other Super Tuesday states.
Obviously, we are known for our untraditional way of caucusing for the Democrats, kind of going into a room and going to different parts of the room to caucus for different candidates. And this year, we're kind of doing away with that to do this mail in option. Do you think we'll go back to that original concept in the future?
My guess is probably not, for a couple of reasons. One is simply that one of the emphasis or points of emphasis for the Democrats was they wanted to allow for some type of absentee or early voting. So it was more like a primary. Well, the closer it got to a primary, one of the concerns that the Democrats had was that it would maybe then run afoul of the New Hampshire law, which New Hampshire law indicates that they are the first primary. So the reason that Iowa was able to go ahead of them for all these years was that we were a caucus rather than a primary. And even though the Republicans in their caucuses, they basically just have a vote and announce results, and that's it. They go on to party business. And that didn't seem to be a problem. Democrats didn't want to do it that way. So you had this different procedure that was fairly involved. And the problem with that, and this is sort of the second aspect of this, is that aside from having to show up, is that you didn't, it took a long time to do this. And for a lot of the precincts that were very crowded, particularly say in the county where I'm at, Johnson County, which is as a heavily Democratic in terms of voter registration, you had a lot of heavy turnout in the caucus precincts, and also a lot of people that would maybe be no party voters, which is what we call the independents here in Iowa, that they would, take time in terms of getting them registered. And so the process was very involved and very long, and often took much longer than people really wanted to spend on a winter Monday night sometime in January or February. And so as a result, there were a lot of complaints about this. And that was another reason why a lot of people wanted to go to some sort of just flat out primary type system, regardless of when it was going to be held. But again, a bigger concern is also the notion of having some option for absentee or early voting, because some people wouldn't be able to get off work or get a babysitter for their kids, or just didn't want to go out on a dark winter night, whatever it happens to be. And so the Democrats tried to do some alternatives to that in 2020, but didn't seem to be overly successful. And so they'll probably stick with some type of mail-in voting. Particularly if it turns out that they get a fairly good turnout for this. Now, again, the turnout would normally be fairly low when you have an incumbent in your particular caucus, as Biden is this time for the Democrats. But if they get a fairly good turnout, despite it being an incumbent, that maybe they'll say, okay, this is going to work. We'll try to tweak it here and there. But they'll probably stick with this procedure at least through 2028.